are now tuned into the Money Level Show.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Money Level Show where we think, act, and prosper. It's been a while, but we have Peter Grandich back on the show. We appreciate you for coming back on, Peter. So Peter is he specializes in estate planning, retirement, and things of that nature. And so Peter, we appreciate you for coming on. Retirement's a big topic nowadays in our country and in the world.
Well, I was looking forward to speaking with you again, so it's my pleasure.
Yeah. It's amazing just to have another man of faith on as well, and to be able to talk about some very important topics today. So, Peter, another reason why I wanted to bring you back on is like we scratched the surface of retirement last time, and actually went and did a deeper dive into it after our interview. I had posted a video. Because you had mentioned like it started with the Romans and the soldiers who pretty much you had to fund your army or else they wouldn't fight for you, and then they were offered pensions, and then ended up progressing to the Germans and everything, and so I think they gave it to like the widows and school teachers or some widows of school teachers or something like that, and so like. The idea of retirement isn't a long-term thing. And so like, I wanted to kind of dive more into that. So what's kind of your take? I mean, you do retirement planning, you do estate planning. What are you seeing on the horizon right now?
Well, first, there's nothing biblical about retirement. There's started really in the 1880s when a German minister, for political reasons, came up with a plan to offer out social benefits of capital money to people if they reached a certain age. And before that, there was no anywhere in the world any type of formal retirement planning or process that governments offered. And that really, started this realistically man-made process, and it has literally caused, I think, next to the debt crisis, the second biggest crisis that not just America is going to face, but many countries are going to face, and that is what I call the retirement crisis. You have to start with some basics. First of all, a lot of things changed in the last 100 or so years. The life expectancy, if you were born in 1900, was only 47. And then by 1950, it reached 68. And just before the pandemic, it peaked at age 79. Why that's important is a lot of things that are now impacting retirement couldn't happen back then. You didn't live long enough to get some of the unfortunate diseases now that are happening because we're living longer and the costs associated with that. The other thing is people, as I said, literally used to work until they physically or mentally couldn't work anymore. One of the things that's lost in this too is that there was no really assisted living or places like that a generation or two ago. We would have, no matter what ethnicity people was, 2 or 3 generations living in a household. It may be a shared household, maybe a 2 or 3 family dwelling, but basically either uncle, great uncle, or grandpa lived with you, as you can remember as a kid, and we kind of took care of ourselves as well. And part of that was easier because we weren't living as long as we're living now. But the real crust of the matter and what's coming is it's because 2/3 of Americans now are living paycheck to paycheck. There's just no way for them to put any excess capital away for a rainy day. And in fact, those who even were doing better than that spent their retirement already, meaning they lived a lifestyle above what their income was. And so anything that they would have put towards retirement was to support a lifestyle above what their real finances supported. So what's going to happen is simply this. We have an aging society. The two-fifths of baby boomers have zero capital. I mean, it's hard to imagine that, but they're at that. And the biggest fear now, this is the single biggest concern, is not dying among seniors. It's outliving their assets. The fear of running out of money and still being alive. And that's an awesome uh, challenge. And it's going to be in a more secular world, people are going to call more and more on the government to supposedly help them. And that just opens all sorts of Pandora's box for cost. And when you tie that into our debt crisis, it's very hard for me to have a bright picture of the future just on those two reasons alone.
Yeah, yeah, you bring some very good points up there. People outliving their assets, as well as before it was like the family unit would take care of the elderly, their elders within the family. I mean, and this probably goes back to like tribes and all types of different dynamics throughout history. Um, so I'm currently looking at like the unfunded liabilities for Medicare and Social Security. I know that currently we have a lot of debt, but I'm getting some different numbers. So from Forbes.com, it states that we're about through 2095, it's about 68 trillion unfunded in Social Security and Medicare, and then beyond that is looking at like 163 trillion. And that's just one number out of many, but this they're saying like this has to be funded by taxpayers. So what does that look like, especially for someone my age? I'm 35 years old, so I'm thinking like, oh, what's it gonna look like for me or my kids when they get that age?
Well, first, as a man who's entered his 40th year in and around Wall Street, it's still hard for me to comprehend that we talk about things in trillions. It was unimaginable 40 years ago to think that we would have trillions in debt. And of course, now we have 32 trillion in hard debt. We now have budget deficits that are in the trillions just on a year-to-year basis. And we have the Congressional Budget Office that now says in 9 years or less, the hard debt will grow to 50 trillion. But you bring out a word that there's a lot of words the Don't Worry, Be Happy crowd on Wall Street don't want to talk about, because if people ever understood the ramifications of both this debt and retirement crisis, it'd be very, very hard to be bullish. But the very fact that our government allows itself not to have to fund its unfunded liabilities. If you and I are in a business and we have people working for us, we have to fund our unfunded liabilities. We have to set aside money that's due our employees and so forth. But the government hasn't had to. And you're right. There are all sorts of estimates from bad enough to horrible to what America is going to have to expect to pay just in Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. And people somehow have this imagination that it's sitting somewhere, that they just withdraw it and that's how they're going to take care of it. No, that money's been spent a long time ago. So when you start talking about unfunded liabilities in the 100 trillion plus, the 32 of hard trillion going to 50, and the issues that we talked about 2/3 of the workforce working paycheck to paycheck, there's another big issue that's going to come into all of this, and that is battle of the ages. You made a very good point. You're 35. So eventually somebody's going to say of your age, hey, wait a minute. You're taking out of my paycheck even more for Medicare. So some 88-year-old man can have a lung transplant and we have to spend hundreds of thousands or whatever that may be. And I can barely survive. He's lived his life. Sorry. And then the other coin, the man's going to say, wait a minute, you took out all those years. I want to live and you're supposed to provide this service. So there's going to be a battle of the ages on what should be paid and all. And then the other thing that's going to happen is affordable housing. Now, that's a topic that, just like politicians don't want to talk about Social Security, they don't want to talk about affordable housing. And that is going to be the real crust. We're watching now, even boomers now, people who were supposed to be the best generation and be the most wealthy, are forcing to live in communions now where they actually have to share households that are healthy, that they're not in need of or could afford assisted living. Where are all these people who are going to have to keep working? And it's going to be harder when you're older. Trust me, at 67, most things are harder for me to do now than when I was 37. So I can't imagine if I live another 10 or 20 years, how much more difficult that's going to be. And I'm going to have to be someone that may have to keep working at that age. These things are inconceivable and just can't happen, can't continue to move in that direction. That's why a day of reckoning, certainly economically, and I believe it be tied to social and politically, is coming. It's only a question of when, not if.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, I definitely agree with that. Um, so, and I live in Washington State, and they just passed a pretty much another tax. It's called the long-term care tax. Where pretty much everyone has to pay out of pocket for long-term care. So I imagine, like, I mean, that's probably just like, a very small percentage, but with the amount of unfunded liabilities, I imagine the taxes can be just pretty gruesome towards people in the future.
So one of the issues now, of course, is two of the diseases, chronic diseases that seniors are running into, and running into in a younger age, not just if you're living in the late 80s or 90s, but as early in the 50s and clearly into the 60s. And that is dementia and Alzheimer's, both of which are debilitating diseases. They require someone else assisting that person. Those people are not going to be able to live on their own. And the facilities, if you can afford them, are so astronomical in cost, anywhere from 8 to 10 to 12 to $15,000 a month, and just most people aren't going to be able to afford that, and so the burden will fall on the children of those people, and if there aren't, then the government will have some in it, but the type of care I would not want to look forward to what the government will provide in bare minimum needs, and these are all pretty tough social issues as well. And it crosses party lines, it crosses all sorts of color of skin, belief or non belief. And it doesn't know any of those. It hits everybody. And it's not talked about now, but all you have to do is come to a state like where I am, the county I live in, is the second most populated senior county next to Lee County down in Florida. And you just have to talk to the people in those communities, and I'm in a 55 and over community, of what medical costs have increased even with Medicare as a supplement and all. And people have just not been prepared for it. I can just tell you that, and I say this all the time, 7 or 8 out of 10 families I see, from working class all the way up to the athletes I used to deal with, live at least one lifestyle above their finances. And people say, well, how do they do that? Well, they borrow from the future. They either incur debt and or things that they would have been saving for or used for in the future. They've not worried about it and used that money to live a lifestyle now. And that's really going to come back to bite those people in a very hard way.
Yeah, and I believe a lot of that is uh, a lot of that probably has been contributed to. I mean, obviously, America's been a great nation. Our language, our music, everything is like just spread worldwide. Um, and a lot of what we see is we live in a very consumer based nation where we have to get the new Tesla, we have to get the new whatever's new, we have to get. And so like that's been like, even for me as a young male, that's been instilled in me through media and such for a long time, where you want to live above your means to live the American dream.
So our families, our parents and grandparents, they used to ask themselves, can we afford it? Younger folks today ask, can we make the first payment? And I say that half facetiously, but half serious. But I think the other issue is this: a generation or 2 generations ago, our dwellings were smaller that we lived with our parents and grandparents in that are now, but they had no need for public storage. You didn't drive along a major highway and every couple of miles see a facility where you're paying people to keep stuff. And that's because the old George Carlin line is too much stuff. We became a society that's been sold a bunch of goods, that more money equals more happiness and more stuff will make you happier. And in reality, psychiatrists and all the studies show that we're more of a mess now than any other generation before us, despite all this stuff. And it's very hard to let go of that stuff. Again, there's a wonderful bit that George Carlin does that he did 20 or whatever years ago. And it's so perfect for today. But that's also, if I may, takes away from what biblical teachings taught us. There's no positive verse in the entire manual to life. At least I know for you and I, it's a manual of life about debt being a positive thing. There's a lot of warnings of the problems. And it's no coincidence that when America got off the gold standard and America went from, it was the largest creditor nation when I started in the business, and now it's one of the biggest serious indebted nations. And it's getting to the point where the can, as we just most recently saw, became very difficult to kick politically and socially and economically down the road. But even after they kicked it, we saw such a bump up in how much more money was suddenly borrowed. We saw almost a $700 billion increase in our long term debt in a matter of a couple of months. And so to expect anything out of Washington to come to the rescue and to deal with these situations, I think is not likely. And it's going to be called upon Americans themselves, if they so choose, to invoke the sentence that most people walk away when you ask about my business. When I say to people less is more, they go, honey, let's go see that guy down the block. I'm not kind of thrilled with this guy, Grandich. He wants me to live out of a can of peas and spam. No, it's not that, but I do try to invoke that they need to be more conservative in their spending natures and what the world is telling them. And a lot of people just don't want to hear that. A lot of people live for today. And unfortunately, because of that, the tomorrows are going to become that much more difficult to live within.
Yeah, that's some very very good points. Peter, I want to share my screen. This was a uh, a website I found in one of my last videos. So this is equable.com, and it talks about the unfunded pension liabilities for state by state. I've always heard like Illinois and like
New
New
Jersey.
Jersey were like the two worst on the very worst ones. Um, so I was looking at that. So there's been some stories of a lot of teachers and other staff members that have been promised pensions that when they retire, uh, they get a letter from the government stating that their pension was unfunded or that they can't pay their pension. And so just for those in the audience, I mean, imagine working, 30, 40 years in a career, and then you're being promised something. And then when you retire, that promise is being taken away, or that's like the government saying, "Oh, gotcha, I was just joking." So that's very concerning for a lot of people. I mean, I work in a pension based job. I mean, it's not something that I'm relying on. It's like you have to pretty much put away in it. So I'm in Washington State, which is it looks pretty good on the 1 through 50 states. But then when you get to like some of these other states, like if it's not 100% funded, then it seems like there's no 100% guarantee for those who are working in these other states. Do you have any take
So
on that?
you bring up a very good point, and here in New Jersey, it has been an acute problem with the state pension system for government workers. But it's not just restricted to government workers. A lot of private companies who were supposed to fund pensions didn't fund them properly. And then, of course, if the market turns sour, as it did last year, that makes it even more difficult for them to make it up for it. But it's one of the just several debt issues. First, of course, is the federal level. Second is the state. But there's also the corporate debt issue, and then there's the consumer debt issue. About 38% of people earning 100,000 or less in the last 12 months have had to resort to credit cards and or high interest loans to get money just to pay for necessities, food, clothing, rent. gasoline. It's becoming increasingly more difficult for that level of income to survive. And what always gets me a little picked off is we have some very wealthy towns in New Jersey. And I say to some of those people at times, and they get ticked off, I say, so let me see if I understand this. You want somebody to cut your lawn, come clean your house, wash the outside of the building, drive your car. You only want to pay them a very little amount of money. And then you're upset because you can't find them or they can't get to you because they can't live anywhere near you because the cost of housing is prohibitive. And that's a big challenge now. It's not only a challenge for the working class for affordable living, but seniors now that are reached that level who need affordable housing as well. At a time when, listen, you're 35, and I very hope I'm wrong in this, but I don't think you'll ever collect Social Security or collect Social Security as we know it today. If it is, it'll be a very watered down system. It'll take you a lot longer in terms of age to work, and you'll get a lot less on average to what you can buy than what one could buy now. And so it is just an enormous situation that gets little or no talking at a time when politicians on both sides of the aisle can't even be in the same room together. So this is such a dire issue that is not going to be fixed in a day, a week, or a month. And we're just making it worse on all sorts of levels. And most people don't want to hear it, or they'll say to me, Peter, I know you're right, but I hope you're wrong. And sometimes I hope I'm wrong too, but it's the mathematics are there. It's common sense, and it's going to be as every day goes by and we don't do the long term things that are necessary, it's going to make the challenge more. And like you said, not only on yourself, but someone that has young children, that environment. And we haven't even talked about the social aspects of happening and what's happening on how people view how life should be and the ways that our parents and grandparents lived is just vastly disappearing in a society that not only where relativism has taken over, but so has secularism.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, agreed, agreed. So I've been talking to many people, and I tell them like I don't believe Social Security is gonna be there when I get that age. That's why I was laughing when you said that because I've been I've been telling people that. So um, outside of like okay, paying off say like paying off debt or what are some other ways that people can be prepared? I mean, you mentioned less is more. So, like me, for being in my position, I have some debt. I do have quite a few assets or whatnot. But like, what would your advice be to, uh, the people around my age or generation, and like, as we enter into your age or generation, in the future, like, what would you say could help us now if we were to start doing?
Well, the first thing I always tell everybody is for 30 days, write down everything you spent money for. And I mean everything. Just whatever happened that day, just write it down. Don't worry about it until the month goes by. And people will find out that they're spending money in areas that clearly can be pulled back on. They didn't even realize it. They go out and buy a super latte, whatever, and pay $6. And they're having four of them a week. And before they know it, and they say, wait a minute, like I think I can make something like that at home for one quarter of the cost. But there are ways. First is budgetary. Most people don't do real financial planning. First of all, you'd be shocked. Even people of means don't have a formal plan. And then when they do it, and Wall Street tends, this is the way they do it with them, is they do what's called needs-based planning. They come in with a specific target, retirement, child's education, whatever. And they focus on that, and they may actually make a decent plan on how to approach that. But what gets sacrificed is all the other things. And before they realize it, because they emphasized here without looking over here, this grows to a problem. And then they try to switch out of one and into another. The other problem is this: people are chasing net worth. It doesn't matter what financial institution it is. You can turn on a commercial, and all of it is based on the fact that they hint that you come to us, we can take what you have, make it to be worth this much, and then you can do all these wonderful things they show you at the end of the commercial that the people end up doing and having a good time. The real key to financial success, and all you have to do is ask any successful business owner, real estate investor, and all, is managing cash flow correctly. And most people don't manage their cash flow correctly. And they create something what's called a lost opportunity cost. And the simplest way to describe it to someone is when you ask most people, if you had $20 and you lost it, how much did you lose? And the average person says what it is seems to be the right answer is $20. But in fact, you not only lost the 20, but what it could have made if you still had it. And a lot of people have lost opportunity costs, especially people that are in business, that are investing in different areas. And if they're sophisticated enough and have enough means that they're able to do things like that, invest in real estate, the markets, commercial real estate, etc., they usually tend to have an expert or somebody to help them in each area. And that person may be very good in that one area, but they never all get together. And most times you find that what somebody's doing here is actually taking away from something over here. And so they need more efficiency. They need someone to, in a sense, be the quarterback to see all of that. And that's very hard for people now because I'm certain that you're working, people are working more hours and longer, uh, tougher jobs these days than ever before. And so cash flow and learning the goods about cash flow and trying to do with less is more. And what I mean by that is I understand. I can see the commercials. I can very well understand why a 80 or $100,000 car looks really, really good. It looks a whole lot better than anything they're making for 20 or 25,000. But at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, what do I need to get from here to here? Does the 25 do it? Does the extra 75,000, what does it do for me other than, well, everybody thinks I'm special or it's great and all? And what can I do with that 75 to make the rest of my life easier? And those are hard choices because, as you said, society and watching television and all the type of stuff, everybody's trying to live a lifestyle that, looks like the rich and famous are living. But remember this much: the rich and famous, as hard, as wealthy as it is to have, are all having many of the same problems we're having. If not, they wouldn't be involved heavily in drugs. They wouldn't be having issues. They wouldn't be committing suicide, those are natures and all. And that goes back to the big issue that the love of money is the root of all evil. Biblical teaching doesn't say money is evil. It says the love of money is the root of all evil. And for someone that once loved money, I have learned the difference. And thankfully, I survived and was blessed enough to survive the downfalls of loving the money. Many people don't get a second or third chance. And so I really think, and I thank you for allowing me to say this, but I think the book that teaches about finance the best is the book that is still in many houses. Now, some houses you got to get the dust off it, but the Holy Bible has more topics about matters of finance and money than it does even about heaven or hell. So I think anything that lasted that long and has influenced that many people is at least worth reading, even from an historical perspective and not a so-called religious perspective.
Yeah, I agree, and I appreciate you bringing that scripture up. That passage is one of the most misquoted a lot of times, because many people will say like the whole money is the root of all evils. No, the love of money is, and that's testament to many different things. We can look at crime. We can look at greed, corruption, scandals. You can look at all those types of things where to get that money, you committed an evil act because you're so obsessed with it. And so, yeah, that's a very good point. And another good point that you mentioned was just the trying to keep up with the Joneses, and uh, looking for other people's acceptance or their approval of you. So that's why a lot of people may get the new car that they may not need, and things of that nature, because man looks at the outside, but God looks at the heart, and we have to really consider that, because it's very important. I think it's very important for me. Even me, I like fashion. I like these different things, but I have to really question myself. What is the reason why I enjoy these things? And so those are some good points. So I do have a question about life insurance. What's your take on life insurance, Peter?
Well, I've come to learn that life insurance, while when you're young, doesn't seem really important, but people who have incidents happen when they get older and don't have it regret that they didn't have it. It's funny you ask that because some of the life ways life insurance is sold is not in a good way. There's several types of products in the life insurance market that I would never get close to. But there is a way of using what we commonly know as whole life insurance as an investment tool. And so people go, wait a minute, insurance as an investment tool? Well, one of the things which is certain to happen is taxes can only go up. As the country and local and state places become more indebted, they're going to seek more ways of revenue and taxing. And right now, one of the last bastions of where money cannot be taxed and can literally pass without being taxed is through life insurance. So it's become more of an estate planning product, even for people not of super wealth. Now, will they eventually have to go after that? Yeah, sometime down the road they will, but at least they'll be grandfathered. They'll never be able to act it. Let me just tell you one thing that I would tell everybody watching, that if anybody, a politician that's in your district is calling for vote them out. There was a movement of the Biden administration. It's kind of died in the wind now, but I think it's one of the most asinine thoughts any politician has ever thought of, and that's taxing unrealized capital gains. The insanity of that, to think that we buy a stock on January 1st and make it very simple, it's $1. And come December 31st, it's $2. If it passes on the law and we go into the next year, I'm going to owe the government a, a tax on the unrealized gain. So let's say I made $1 and they're taxing at 20 or 30%. I'm going to have to write come that April 30%. January 2nd, there's bad news in the company. It goes back to $1. It doesn't matter. I still owe that money on an unrealized capital gain. What do you, what, what, what person is taxing something that doesn't really even exist yet because it's only on paper? And it was just an insanity thought. It also causes all sorts of problems with people who would be inherited assets that are paper rich but cash flow poor. It just the insanity of that and the thought of that is just goes counter to everything of what capitalism is about. But understanding now that secularism and socialism and a little bit of communism has seeped into the economics in the United States now. And there are people, and of course, when people don't have anything, and somebody says, "Well, the reason you don't have anything is because that person over there has it and keeps it from you." That's why some of those ideas now even get mentioned when they're really asinine to begin with. And to me, that's the biggest one out there right now.
That's funny. Especially if you don't sell the asset, you don't realize the gain, and they're trying to tax you based off like the all time high of the stock or what or whatever. Like that just doesn't make any sense
You,
at all.
you know how I view it? It's like going to the racetrack. And before the race is over, because your horse is leading, they said you've already won and you got to pay the tax on it. And suddenly some horse comes by and goes by it. I mean, the race isn't over till it's over, and you really shouldn't have to
Yeah.
pay a tax until the time comes that when you sell something. And I think that is just one of the most idiotic ideas that was floated in recent times.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. The Supreme Court has been on fire lately. I would say they made some really good calls. I think in terms of free speech and such. And this obviously um, there's things that are said that people don't like, and the question the question that they've had to answer a lot is this protected under the First Amendment. They also made their decision on Biden's student loan forgiveness plan. Like, I would have been a beneficiary of that, but I was kind of wondering. I was like, okay, did they made? I think they actually probably saved us from some higher inflation or something, because our debt issue is already a problem. And if that were to be passed, then that would have contributed to the problem that we're already having. What's your take on that?
So there were two issues that troubled me with that. The first one is someone like myself who worked hard, saved enough money for my kid to go to college, and they went, or a neighbor of mine who borrowed the money, worked two jobs, kid went to school, got the education, paid off their loan, which they're obligated to do, and move on. And what do you do? It wasn't as if the people were unfairly charged. The people that still owe, in other words, they paid a lot more interest or had bad terms versus others. That was not the case. And most got the education if they so choose to go forward. It wasn't like they didn't get it. And the bigger question is then is okay, so now, like you just said, let's just say they did that forgiveness. Well, the government was counting on that money for you to pay back. So now they have to seek it from somewhere else. So someone like me who did the right thing, or my neighbor who worked hard but paid it back, is now going to have to pay higher taxes simply because they forgave somebody else that. But the bigger issue with that is, where do you stop? What do you say about, okay, what about people who are falling behind on their mortgages? Why don't we start having to, forgive that? The problem with that is more and more people want to get in the wagon and get pulled versus being the puller. And while I would say 10% of our population needs to be in the wagon, they've had just unfortunate things happen, things that are just, they need to be helped. And there's no question you have to help them. But there's so many more people getting that wagon, and some of those people in the wagon now were just pullers 5 or 10 years ago. And you're going to get to the point where, hey, I don't want to pull, and we're demeaning the pullers. We're not thanking the pullers. We're actually demeaning the people that are pulling them, and that they're the bad people and all. And this is all in what I've called, and as you know, the worst economic, social, and political era for America. I don't believe America is more divided now than perhaps other than the Civil War. And that division crosses all sorts of lines: wealth, race, religion, non, and so forth. And it's lost the middle ground while we lost the middle class. And it's really setting us up for a battle. And we're already seeing that happening in countries, just as you and I speak. Look what's happening in France and other places like that. And the lawlessness, most people don't want to see lawlessness. Doesn't matter where they're living, they want to feel safe enough that they can get to and from where they're going, and whatever they have is safe, that they don't have to worry about somebody taking it. And the lawlessness now, what we're accepting, where we're just accepting people who can go in someplace and freely take something and not have to have any repercussions. And God forbid the person working there tries to stop them, they get in trouble for trying to stop them. It's leading us down a road that's going to become very, very much uglier, on top of all the things you and I discussed. That's why it's difficult for me, from a secular viewpoint, to be very positive. I mean, I take comfort in my relationship with Christ and where my eternal life is going to be. But those of us who are living here, or respecting those that don't have that same belief and think this is it, it's becoming very, very hard to operate in that world. And I can't see it getting anything but worse as time goes on.
Yeah, yeah, that definitely. And for me, like, even in my position with student loans and such, like, one thing that I do wish like the government, would have done, or even the public education system, was to educate, kids on like what is interest rates, what are, if you borrow this money, this is how you're gonna have to pay it back, and and such like that. And I feel like a lot of kids in poverty probably didn't get that education to
Well,
understand what they
you
were.
know who should be yelled at?
Yeah,
Seriously,
yeah,
the schools that have charged these astronomical numbers. The cost to get an education in America has just gone insane.
mm-hmm, yeah,
And schools are just beyond wealthy from it. And they're getting a free ride in this. They're not pointed to. You're right. There are certainly people that went into this not knowing what it should be, but I think that's also causing hopefully a decision now of people saying, is it worth going? Maybe I need to look at a different way, or maybe if God bless me with hands and tools, that I can go for a vocation and not have to spend 20 years of paying back something just so I can have a degree that may or may not even get me the income that will make up for incurring that cost. And that's what we've been sold a lot of goods, and the schools just keep quiet and make a ton of money off of this. That's the people who should be pointed at, that people aren't pointing to.
All right, so if you're watching this show, everybody, we need to go protest these schools, y'all.
Absolutely. Believe it or not, you're absolutely
Yeah,
right. The amount that they have raised tuitions and the lifestyle that those people associated with the school, what they're paying themselves and where they're living and all, those are the people you need to be go
yep,
protesting against.
yep, exactly. I've had a few conversations. I'm a director at a school district, and so I had a few conversations with our high schoolers that were graduating about like room and board and the cost of that, and everything. And some of them actually made some wise decisions. They decided to go to school locally and to be able to save costs. And so I was like, okay, that's a good choice. Rather than going to like somewhere else and having to pay room and board, these astronomical costs for that and everything. And so they definitely made some good decisions. So Peter, thank you for coming on. Is there anything else you would like to share with the audience before we leave?
Well, I just want to thank you because you give me this opportunity to speak in a way that the major financial network, even if they afforded us the time, would not want us to have the discussion you and I just had. So I hope your work can continue. I hope people are more and more listening. I certainly encourage people such as yourself, and why I'm so happy to come on a show like this and be able to have a discussion that you have and I've. And I think if people had more of a chance to talk in this manner as you and I did, and some of this can filter in, I think they would have a better chance going forward, because it's a big challenge now. I don't think any generation has had to face the enormity of multiple of challenges on fronts. We didn't even talk about geopolitics and the things that are happening with the world and changes in currencies and all that type of stuff. And that's a lot for an 18 or 25-year-old person to suddenly have to become an expert in and try to understand that now. But in reality, they better, because if they don't, it's challenging enough, and that's only going to make it that much worse for them.
Yeah, agreed. Well, thanks, Peter. Appreciate you for coming on. I look forward to our next time.
Thank you, and God bless you.
You too.